I just explain who we have with us, and then a couple of thoughts, and then I'm going to go down the line as you see them here, starting with Fraser on my obviously Fraser Nelson, editor of the Spectator, comment writer for the that I can see, being a huge friend of the Centre for Social Justice, being heavily involved in a huge amount of work that we've been doing on a number of issues. So Fraser very well. Robert Halfon MP, who has been the chairman of the Select Committee on Education and a huge supporter and involved hugely in social justice. Welcome, Robert. And then we've got Kieron Boyle, who's helped us out enormously in this subject that we're talking about, which is the children of lockdown. Where are they now? With the data and some of the research work that's being done, and he can talk a little. And finally, of course, but not least, Mercy Muroki, who you'll all know as a star of and we once had the benefit of Mercy at the Centre for Social Justice, much greater things since then. So, welcome to the panel. So, today is to look at, and I want to set a ground rule here. I do not want, when we open up to questions, not want a general set of questions about the state of the Conservative Party, what we should do, what we won't do. I simply will rule those out of order because this subject is more important than what I call shallow politics, and let's leave that behind at the door. Very big subject, and it affects lives that often don't get seen higher echelons of politics. So it's very, very important for us to discuss this thing properly. Quite capable of doing that. So let me just first start with some facts. Following the unprecedented lockdown, the gap in attainment of poorer children has grown to the largest it's been at for over 10 years. We're almost people from poorer backgrounds are almost 18 months behind wealthier colleagues at school. Over 100,000 absent from school as a result of this and rising. The NSPCC calls about children, calls to the NSPCC about children living is now up by over half, 50% since the lockdown. Deaths are higher than at any other time in 20 years. And of the cost of living that again bear down on those in the poorest to do with the lockdown and the inability to be able to get supply to meet demand. Now I will just simply say before I ask Fraser to speak that I have for some time right at the start about the scale of the lockdown that we undertook. It's never, and it's questionable at the end of the day how many lives actually that lockdown saved from it. And I'm going to ask Fraser to say a few words about some of the other alternatives that existed there. So in the end, we were almost due to lockdown for a fourth time. Just voted against it in the House of Commons, and I'm afraid stopped it in its tracks. As far as I can see, that we must never ever go down this road again. Natural damage has been absolutely astonishing. And any report that comes out about all of these points that I've just raised, it's not just economics, it's based directly as a result, particularly for the poorest in society. So with those bad-sided words, I'm going to ask Fraser now to speak. Fraser, over to you.
I'm going to stand up actually, but we've got no AV and I can then, I'm not quite as good as Colin Hanson. But I think this is one of the most important topics, I agree with Iain. When you think of the, I don't know how long we've all got to watch this work its way out in the House of Commons, but as it does, there's something really important, a little less attention and scrutiny than it deserves, and that is for a very interesting reason. when we look at lockdown, it was the most dramatic, draconian social policy of our lifetimes. It was marked out by two features: complete and utter absence of any scientific evidence that it worked. The reason was because they've got strictures there saying they can only recommend public health policy proven to work. Lockdown all the way was a theory with no real knowledge of it would cost more lives than it saved. And right now, as the evidence comes in from around the world, unclear whether lockdown did more lives and saved more lives than it risked. But the other thing about having no evidence is the near uniformity supported. When you think of the many campaign groups that are in this country, groups full of energy, full of really sincere people looking out to help the disabled, not a single one of these groups opposed lockdown. Now, what you've got to take it and trust sometimes that the government knows what it's doing. At the time COVID was announced, everybody was sleeping in the dark. But human nature is such that if you don't, it becomes a bit harder later on to actually think, well, maybe I was wrong and maybe faster. So that means that all the social organisations, which should really be looking at the effects on children, the effects on the poorest, aren't really scrutinising it that much. The Guardian, right? I mean, not my favourite newspaper, but still a really proud record of putting the spotlight on some very, very small, relatively slow, to get around to chronicling the problem. Except it wasn't the pandemic that caused the problem he's talking about, it was lockdown. My point there is so much. There are people who need help now, people who had suffered lockdown, and they're not going to get that help if nobody admits they need it. Journalists shine lights on problems we can't solve them. But I'm a firm believer that the first step is solving it and talk about it. And that's what the CSJ is very good at doing. When we look at the economic damage, we know that no country in Europe locked down longer and harder. For instance, no country in Europe suffered worse economic damage. When you look at all the economies now last week, that the GDP revision meant that we haven't even got to where we were pre-pandemic to do that. And certainly with the projections, the reason why the growth plan is so desperately needed is because there's going to be no growth. And the blow to Britain was of a magnitude greater than any other European country. It's sort of one thing. You know, you can get around, you can paint the over with more cash or furlough, paint over it is a social damage. Now, we are mainly going to talk about kids today, but before we talk about one of the side effects of furlough. Now, furlough was an incredibly scheme that saved lots of people losing their jobs. It was, but unfortunately, there were side effects. Is that the country simply hasn't gone back to work in the way that it did pre-pandemic. The gap, blown in our labour force. If you actually look at the figures of the people before the pandemic, it was pretty much an all-time high in Britain. That was a result of policies, including the one that Iain did when he was doing welfare reform. To move people away from welfare to make sure that economic growth was genuinely and widely shared. We had got so far with that, taking such a big knock. Again, we're in the biggest knocks of any developed country. So we're in the critical. Boris Johnson on his last day, number 10, said that unemployment was lower than a space opera. Yeah? Typical of Boris language. But that is only official. You actually count all the other levels of unemployment. Count all of those on out-of-work benefits. I mean, million people. That is a staggering figure. That you're basically not exposed to economic growth, who are isolated from the rest of the economy. That amounts to huge figures. That's 13% of the huge UK of the overall UK population. This one is closer to 20%. So Blackpool is 25%. Imagine that, a quarter town or a small city on national work benefits. This is a major social justice issue. Why more people aren't upset about it. It's why people still go along with the official unemployment count. Because forget about the, I mean, sure, it costs money keeping on people with benefits, but money is a human life and human potential. We're still in an economy now where I think there are additional vacancies. That's almost twice as many as there were at any stage in the last decade. In the 2010s, there was about 600,000 vacancies. Now there's almost double that. So, as a country, managed to combine mass joblessness with mass. The inability to put these two together is a social scandal, not just an economic scandal. So, of course, that can, maybe be helpful when you look at those who've left the labour market. Very analogous to the after effects of deindustrialisation, when people over 50 and never quite came back. That's what we're risking right now, unless we recognise this and move to do whatever back into the world of work. Because, as we know, the longer people stay out of work, the harder it is for them to get back to it. Of the greatest social scarring will be in the country. Now, others got three graphs because I love graphs. We've got Spectator data hubs full of graphs, but A levels. You guys will have seen what happened there. So we're in this situation now where 36% of people got A or plus, and 45%. That makes it very, very difficult for people who studied really hard to have their talents. Very hard for universities to work out who to get places to. Basically, this makes pushing. That's what this does. It makes it harder, a lot harder, to think and work your way to where you want to go. Overall, this country's got a pretty good record of social mobility. But when it comes to, I'm also involved in the Social Mobility Foundation. Some of the kids there, from given the result they thought, because they thought that a kid from their background in their school could not possibly get an A. It's totally criminal what this has done to the aspirations of young people, and they are still owed, in my view. And the next one is about the Scottish Highlanders. This is the gap in people that you can start to manage to reduce the attainment gap between the richest and poorest, but that went soaring down. And then the final graph is one that you mentioned first of all, the gap in Key Stage 2. That's the test taken at the end of primary school between rich and poor. Look at this, wiped out. That's what happens when you deprive children of school, because the school is an environment leveler. It gives people with support. I mean, my kids were each in a bedroom each with an iPad each. When he was growing up, I think they were all in one bedroom at one stage. There's no way family like his would have had some working throughout that. It's children like that who were being denied the basic British dream. Growth. If you come here, we will teach your kids. That's if you're an immigrant, but even if you're not, there is the great social leveler. When you take away the classroom, you take away the social justice, and you leave a lot of kids behind for a long time, including many who didn't go to cities. Now, my point here is that there is a lot more we can do. Until we do that, we won't be able to move to solving it. And I don't think we should give up. Lockdown, disaster, nightmare, lots of mistakes made, that's all behind us. That's not the way I see it. The kids who dropped out of school right now can still be reached, can still be helped. They can still be given the care. It's not too late to make a difference to those kids. And we can start and do something towards giving them back what they were owed all along.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very proud to be here today because the Centre for Social Justice has put a tank in influencing my work as chair of the Education Committee. This is one of the most important subjects that there could be. I was profound closures. I was against school closures because I regard four horsemen of the apocalypse galloping towards our young children. Entertainment, mental health problems, lifetime child safeguarding. And if I'm straight with you, I actually think it was to close the schools for most pupils. I fought to get all the way, and the damage, as has partly been described by Fraser, will be sadly for many years to come. And it's a reflection about how we forget about children in society. We produced a report called the Forgotten Children. And the COVID inquiry, when you had the draft terms of the COVID inquiry, it did not mention. Now we got that changed to a minimal degree. But the fact that the COVID in its draft did not even consider the effect of school closures as a kind of real symbolic illustration of how we let down our young. And it's good to see in the audience the former Children's Commissioner, Anne Longfield, because she was one of, from the very beginning, who stood up to try and get the schools open again for pupils. And I think she deserves a huge amount of credit for beginning. It wasn't fashionable to do so, and every time I raised it, former children's, we had a pile of XXX on our heads because of it. And get it today, and if you look at the attainment gap, some of which Iain has meant, he said the primary attainment gaps widened to the largest in 10 years. 40 pupils now meet the expected standards in maths and English. Those pupils who missed schooling were often surprise in the poorest parts of it. And disadvantaged pupils are now 8 months behind, according to the Education Policy Institute, of the school shutdowns. And the safeguarding problems, there was who were exposed to online harms, who joined county line gangs. We know that our committees looked at this, the tragic cases of Arthur Lavinia Hughes, and horrifying reminders of some of the terrible things that happened. 46,000 children are now involved in county line gangs, and I see that in my own, no doubt Iain does. And if you look at the health problems during lockdown, eating disorders amongst young girls just went up by 400%. Royal College of Psychiatry, 60% increase in referrals for mental health disorders, percent rise in eating disorders, 18% of pupils, according to full mental health disorder, and those kids missed 3 weeks of schooling. The highest cause of death for 15 to 19-year-olds. But what is the biggest problem? It isn't just the safeguarding the lifetime chances, the educational attainment, mental health. 1.7 million persistently absent children for the most part, and within that, a subset, and I coined this awful phrase, but it is important to use it, over 100,000 ghost children. These are children who vanished from the school rolls. I don't know if anyone has ever seen the kind of series, The Departure, where you have 1,000 classrooms in the most disadvantaged part, 1,000 schools in the most disadvantaged parts of the United Kingdom, where the equivalent of a whole has just vanished. And to me, that is it's unacceptable. Over 13,000 children in critical exam years this year, they moved from school. 500 children severely absent in half the local authority. Pupils on free school meals, 3.4 times more likely to be absent from school. And so what to me a priority for the Secretary of State to deal with Now look, I'm supportive of grammar schools in my area, but the priority shouldn't just be to go on about grammar school. I'm going to get these 1.7 million absent children back to school. That must be Education Secretary, rather than just going on about grammar schools or Oxbridge or Creators, when we've got brilliant FE colleges up and down the country. Anyway, and I was in their position, I would have every single local authority, every single severe absence problems, and you've got some schools with 40% absence. I would have those schools on a computer, right up on a big board, and those local authorities, those academy chains, and see what I could do to children are getting back to school. It must be the priority. Damage that lockdown has done for these kids. It's unforgivable. If so, it must be about this. And what are Conservatives for? But making sure that every child that ladder of opportunity, we have denying all those kids a chance by not making priority, and not enough is being done. The catch-up fund is not reaching, although it's a good thing. There's £5 billion. That should absolutely. There's even an underspend targeted at getting back the kids to school. And the way you do with some schools and go to the families directly and employ attend in the schools to go to the families and get these children back into. There are examples of this. So the Peace and Crimes Conservative, Festus Akinbusoy, if I'm pronouncing his name right, he's a reduction unit budget. He and his team are running pilot extra schools to get the kids on. Rachel D'Souza, the current Children's Commissioner, used to go out every morning in the schools back into school. And there's other examples like St Catherine's College. It worked with children who suffered mental health. Again, getting them back into. Just in conclusion, if it doesn't mind, I will want to make on in the party. I know the government talk about economic growth and economic capital. So are we as a party, if we don't talk about and build social capital, as economic capital without social capital, they go in hand with each other. If you concentrate on helping the most, the poorest students, the most vulnerable, on getting them on that ladder, then you do build economic capital in the long run. As a party that we believe in social capital as much as we do in economic capital. Those in government talk about social capital and talk about problems like this, because as I said, a mission on social justice, because we believe in education, we believe in getting people on the ladder of opportunity, and the government have to decide what, and surely getting 1.7 million children back with the 120,000 children on the who become the ghost children, getting them back, finding where they are. They don't even know where these people are. Must be for our country, and I hope very much about social justice over the coming days at our conference. Thank you.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. I've got good news and bad news. So the bad news is that I'm probably the soft conference. The good news is that if you don't care what I say, you probably won't hear it. Everybody, of course, knows Fraser and Robert and the of impact on urban health. So very quickly, impact on urban health. We're a philanthropy based in South. Test and find solutions to how you make cities healthier places for everybody. We work with business, work with government. The work is very real world, and it's all very grounded. And I wanted to, in a way, broaden the conversation here, because to some extent we're all locked down, and I just want to pick up on Fraser's point about understanding the size of the business ahead of us. I wanted to reflect on what lockdown and what's followed it has meant for health. And if we're going to look at the underexplored areas or underexplored pandemic, I think we need to pause on precarity and the implications of precarity, very practical solutions to respond to it. So stepping back a bit, it's a combination of three different things. It's a combination of our biology and genetics, of our choices and our actions, and it's a combination of the environment that we grow up in, that we live in. And by far the biggest impact on our health is that last one. The implications of lockdown, the implications of increased unemployment, debt, the implications of social isolation, there is much health impact. So that, Fraser, I think you'll suggest to us that there are probably greater impacts from that. A cost of living crisis, but is also a health. What does practically mean? Well, if you're living in cold or damp homes, that's have to choose between heating and eating. That's bad for your health. In fact, being worried is as bad for your health as living on a low income. And this all plays out. This plays out in greater pressure on the NHS, and it plays out in fewer people in the workforce. So let's be clear that the health of the nation, and I'll come into why the pandemic is, the health of the nation wasn't great going into lockdown. So over the past years, what we've seen is basically shrinking. What we've seen is life expectancy stalling, and particularly for those people on the lowest incomes, life expectancy has been decreasing. Where with very similar places in Birmingham as well, between streets a mile apart, there's a healthy life expectancy. That's basically the difference between getting to play with your grandkids really, really matters. And so while it's entirely right, of course, that we get backlog of lockdown, and 6 million people need to see it's vital that we also focus on the social backlog of lockdown. I was in a larger health issue than the healthcare backlog, and it's one that's going to play out over decades, and we need to do something quite seriously about it. Don't think that any political party has a sufficiently coherent or sufficiently to how they're going to deal with that as well. So where we see this playing out very practically real world work is the precarity of finances, the precarity of employment. So let me just go through those very quickly. So the precarity of finances, health and income are really closely intertwined. And if you haven't got problems with your money, that could often lead to a very vicious cycle. You work it through. Have poor health, it can be difficult to hold down a job. If you don't have a steady income, it's difficult. And that can be really, really problematic for the NHS and how much money we have to spend on practical things we can do. And I'm going to just share some practical examples that I think it's helpful to get into the example in our work. We piloted a scheme called the Financial Shield. It's connecting housing associations and GPs with people who have poor health, and what it's doing is it's giving those people targeted debt advice, support to access their stuff, advice, for example, how to get council tax holidays. And the scheme associations, it means that they're getting more reliable payments. For the individuals who are on the incomes are improving by about £2,000 a year. That's a very, very meaningful difference. Most important, improves their health. If you look at housing, housing also has an effect on our health, but precarity of housing has a really big impact on our mental health. The private rental sector, where you have the worst tenancies and the worst quality. And poor mental health plays out in poor physical health. Poor physical health plays out in professional health services. But again, there's very practical things you can do about it. So one thing that we're backing out of tenancy is basically a glass door website, but for landlords, report on their tenancies. What it allows them to do is call out poor quality. Now, councils actually have loads of powers to find poor quality landlords, to encourage better housing. Landlords are, and that's how this thing works. The whole thing actually pays for itself. It's a bit like a speed thing. Is it improves people's health. And then we also see real issues and precarity of employment, particularly coming out of lockdown, particularly in the living crisis. One area we really focus on is nighttime workers on night massively over lockdown. But there are now 7 million people in the UK. And night shifts is often linked with really poor quality, low pay, bad for people's health. Good work, it's good for your health. Bad work, it's bad for. And there's loads that you can do there too. So we've worked very practically with a company called Veolia, their management company, on a scheme called Night Club. And what this has been doing is experts very practical tips about how you can redesign shift work to make it slightly healthy. Over 3/4 of their employees have said that their mental health has improved. So the point is this, that lockdown has had huge impacts on our health, the social backlog of lockdown. But we also need to be clear that one-off things won't solve it. We need a much more pragmatic focus. So whether that be things like the financial shield on debt, whether it be things like the nightclub on employment. What they're all trying to get intervention before crises become huge health crises. It needs to be pragmatic, it needs to be joined up, we need much more of it. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I want to. The first thing I was writing on my notes is that locking down schools was a big mistake, and in my felt that would be a controversial thing to say, because let's not forget that was one lockdown, a very controversial thing to say actually I don't think we should be home permanently, and it's great to see, although it's to see, should I say, that the data is actually showing that there's no really that the fact that locking down schools was a big miss. Some people did try to argue that it would not be. When I think about the problem, and the other panelists have alluded to it, 1.7 million regularly absent, according to the school census. Those 100,000 goes. I feel incredibly sad because my family is years old, and when you hear about sort of why immigrant families come to Britain, the term is to get a better life, basically, to find a better life for themselves. And what that really is better education. That's fundamentally what it means. It means better opportunity, a promise of meritocracy. And I think there was once upon a time that was the promise of a British education system. And sadly, I can confidently say that that is the promise that children get when they enter this system anymore. And that has only been exacerbated. There have been really good efforts, I would say, to look into are these persistently absent children, and that means over 10% persistently absent means 10% or more of their school days of children aren't in school. Children aren't in school for more than 10% of the sessions. And goes children plus. Dame D'Souza's Big Ask Survey is one example. Half a million people, children, to find out about school. The Department for Education has also produced a research in February called Securing Good Attendance and Tackling Persistent Absence, identifies some reasons why children are absent. Two of those were anxiety, so pupils were anxious about returning to the school environment. The second was pupils and parents had specific health needs, and those would obviously be linked in with COVID, so there was a lot of COVID absences. But I think it's the third set of reasons that I'm almost more ambiguous and less tangible, I would say, that people had disengaged from education during the pandemic, and they found that to be one of the key persistent absence. They also described this in another way: people's attendance perfection following national lockdown. So disaffection and disengagement reasons. I think that's important because, in a way, when you talk of not wanting to come back because they're anxious or because they have some health issues at home, those are things you can almost find solutions to. You know, you can put in a mental health to ease them back in, or a physical health plan. Whereas, you know, what is that? Why would a young child feel so with education that they just simply stop? Incredibly sad, and I think that's almost where the most attention needs. Really, there's no easy solution to that, and my daughter loves school, for example, and I'm sure many of you will have children, and you know they feel like their friends, and that's what a child should feel about school. That's about school. So the idea that they would feel the complete opposite, if they don't see it as something that will benefit them, is incredibly sad. And I think as well why this matters, and it matters because all the research on the associations between absenteeism and so it's positively associated with or negatively associated, whichever way, a whole host of negative social outcomes. This includes crime, this includes problem drinking, all sorts of things. All the research is very clear. The more days a child spends away from school, the more likely they are to achieve. And secondly, be poor. But you know, live a life. You know, that is essentially what some might say is not good, because that's how they feel their future society. They don't feel like anything. You know, their life is meaningful, and so they go in. They do feel disaffected and disengaged. And finally, we need to talk about what can be done, and not a very good understanding of who these children are. And I appreciate projecting enough for everyone. I appreciate that that's the nature of the problem. If they're missing children, then by definition, you can't really find out. I think I would welcome the government's. The government has said that this local authority administered registers. So when people take their children out, I actually did this at one point during lockdown because of just my family sent my daughter out of school. I didn't feel it was benefiting her, although she wasn't. All you had to do was write an email, basically, to the head teacher and say, right, I can't remember the act, but I'm exercising my right under X act, and my child is not going to. And what should happen from there is the local authority should get in touch with you, and you're meant to give. But they never got in touch with me, basically. So, you know, anything could have happened to my child, and they wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't have done anything. So I think we should very much focus on recording, so that parents do have a plan, an education plan for when they're their children out of school, and also have a massive focus on trying to track. I appreciate it's difficult, but you know, the government has the resources if it wants to do. And I think those two should be the priority going forward to men while we still can.
Okay, just as I was about to get up, they started to, I apologise. I was opposed to lockdown, but I'm certainly in favour of locking them down. We can certainly get away with it. So we're going to have to try and ask the question I want to make that have emerged out of all of this, which is quite interesting. The first is, interestingly enough, the 5 pathways to poverty that we publish here, addictions, debt, educational failure, and worklessness, could easily become statements that we should make about what happens. Precarity being a peculiar. So, in all of that, if that's where we are, that's an interesting point, because all of those are another. The second thing is, I just remind everybody that what we expect is something we never thought could happen in the United Kingdom. The place where we thought free choice and free speech. We threw all those out the window. So if you read with lockdown, you yourself were pretty well locked down. And so social media, if you questioned any of this stuff, you were told you didn't know what you were talking about. And run by a series of theories and peculiar forecasts to tell us that so many of us would die that it would destroy the country. In fact, as it turns out, in hindsight now, although many of us felt that at the time, we're against in terms of the medical bit, which was herd mentality, in other words, getting enough immunity to the infection. They locked that one happened as we ended up with a herd mentality where we literally else that disagreed with the mainstream of thought. So there is also a freedom problem. The moment it teaches us a lesson, the moment the idea that there can be dissent is the moment when you end up into the floor to questions. So let's start. You were first up, and then I'll start taking from the back. So you can
Janet Fisher, Chief Executive, Black Music Now. For context, we're a music and social impact 20% of the special schools in the UK. Given that we have music, art, the creative subjects, have social, educational, health, and personal, and that we talk about needing to build embedded relationships with children who are with families who are not in schools. And we know that those children who are experiencing are huge numbers of children who identify as disabled and those with additional learning needs, is the role of both arts, creativity, and the importance government level in using creative solutions to fix the problem.
Well, yeah, so I mean, that's we are creative in our curriculum, and it's been crowded out, and the answer to this on the school day. And I don't mean that you stay at school till 9 o'clock at night learning algebra. I'm talking about is that you have a longer school day where you would do some of the creative subjects, where you do well-being and other activities an hour extra every day. And because statistic after another shows that if you do that, you increase educational attainment, you increase mental health, and stop the mental health problems that we've described in this panel. It is possible to do it without a huge amount of money, because I've been to schools, so academy chain in my constituency, and they've managed to have a lot of organising the existing time. So of course I want more funding, and there are big funds to confront and be honest about. Just as a general statistic, education between will just have a 3% increase in real terms, whereas the National Health Service 45 to 46% will be over that period. I do not understand why as a place as much value on education as we do the National Health Service. I just genuinely don't get it. Here's the answer to some of the things that you've raised.
Well, thank you for everything you guys are doing, have done in terms of breaking this issue. Really having great data. Like you, I got wrong when I was talking to you proposed that zoos and theme parks and prime art was open. It seems to me that it's only going in one way. It's getting, all the trajectory direction is getting worse and worse. And Robert has one of his phrases about behind it to solve it. And I just wondered from the panel, what do you think it would take a government working with
Thank you, the government. Yeah.
So, what in particular, I'm sorry?
Well, government's got a lot. Government can do a lot, obviously. It's got money, it's got things it requires. But it doesn't seem to be used for the effectively.
What government also needs is pressure, and that is why every single person in this room can help and needs to know that people care about this more than forgotten about it. This is not some yesterday you moved on and now focus about gas prices. We can worry about multiple crises that say, and I think it can't be stressed enough just how a whole bunch of people just to raise awareness about this, just keep pushing this agenda, white local MP, some professional organisation to cast attention on this. And I mean, this is politically our best ignored. But what I mean to say is, you just don't want to acknowledge. You don't want to acknowledge that you're doing your job as commissioner, and others what you were saying was. But it's far easier to not think about that. So I think everybody, in whatever small position of power you might have, do what you can to keep this on the agenda.
So everyone in the middle there.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to very much on the panel about organisation.
You'll have to speak up because it's very difficult.
Thank you. I think relation to schools is to carry away from local authorities, and I think some of these issues that are arising because of the depth of headmanisation. So I'm interested in the panel's view about whether you think that more power enable more children to be back at school.
Can you tell us where you're from?
Leicestershire County.
Okay, but should local authorities have greater power, or is the academy system capable of picking up the burden that now lies in front of us? Who wants to come in on this one?
So look, I don't think it is an either or. We can find plenty of local authority schools where they have problems with school absences, just as you have many academies where there are problems with school absences. I do think that academy trust should be inspected at the moment. I've never understood why that is the case. And I think some academy senior people in the academy have a lot of power, and examples of incredible academies, but I've also seen examples of academies where they just runs around because they've got a deficit, and then the school that was successful, and this was a sort of semi-PRU type school, but it was very successful, and they looked as that academy chain is gone. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's about what is a good system. I believe that the best, the way you judge things in terms of outcomes, and system on the whole is good. But I also, where local authority schools are working, keep those as well.
At the back, put your hand up. You have to shout because we can't hear a word you're saying. Can you just come down, do you think, down here? It'll be much easier to come down. A bit closer. Enough of you lot, right?
Children and young people over the course of lockdown were not only neglected but also vilified. We were the hardest hit and told it was all our fault, labelled super spreaders, and treated like we were the disease carriers. We held a field throughout the whole thing, but the reason we were being used as scapegoats is because children obviously don't. There's no reason why you should be threatened by children disagreeing with what you're doing. We can't vote for them. We make the government care about children, despite the fact that children are never going to be able to vote in the next election.
London. Did you all get the question at the back? Who wants to pick up the first question about the fact that children don't have a vote? It's a queue about things that can be done. The health service are at the front of the queue.
Yeah, just quickly, I think there aren't enough people like Iain there. I mean, the Children's Commissioner exists because nobody else really speaks up for children. Trade unions don't speak really for the people. They're listening for more disclosures. And when you look at the system, you're completely right. There is a massive problem. And if it wasn't for the position of Children's Commissioner, there would be nobody at all. Massive, I think lockdown demonstrated actually just how every single turning event, the ongoing lockdown afterwards, time and time again. Obviously your generation won't be voting Tory anytime soon, right? So, there is sort of government ignores the young, not just in this, but in other things. And during lockdown, and actually the general thought process, the way in which the welfare of the dropped as a subject, made me did think there was something wrong fundamentally in political culture with those who swing votes in elections, who tend to be older, etc. So, we're giving triple loss. But when it comes to people getting a basic education, that's not.
Young people and children can very much have can have influence. I mean, if you look at what the kind of influence on the environment debate, I mean, lots of people look to what children have done there. They can have influence. But I do think the only way that should be heard in central government is for there to be a family department or a strong family state, because there is nobody in government really, in terms of children, their voice, children as units of the family. And I think that's the only way, really, because they're not voters, politicians don't listen very well. So I think that's
the point here I just want to make, but it's not just the government here. If you watch what happened during lockdown, the BBC, their number one priority every single day, what the projection was of deaths on a daily basis. And that overcame it about what was actually happening to our children. It was seen through a very middle-class perspective, being able to go into their garden. But if you're in a 16-story high tower block, grotty little balcony if you're lucky, then it's a wholly different story, the effect lockdown, the media were very, very poor about scrutinising what was actually happening down, because they were so convinced themselves of the orthodoxy that was important, and it was the only thing we could do. So we do need to ask that question as well. Okay, let's see, back here at the front again, the gentleman here, and I'll give two more after that, and then we're done.
What data do you have from places that didn't lock down about how their children in Florida? And also the impact on wearing masks for children within this kind of speech and their social skills and the impact that wearing masks have.
I'm afraid I can ask you to read that because it's sweet.
Yeah, sure. On masks, there were studies done in surprise, that weren't particularly effective for children in schools. But that happened actually. Now, on Sweden, it's difficult to work out because so much of inflation in Sweden is that way. So that this graph you earlier is simply not a widening gap between the rich and the poor attainment in Sweden. All the Sweden traditional graphs of immigration recently, but absolutely not by lockdown. I haven't seen any figures of the data-rich example of what we could and should have done. It's not like the Swedes weren't careful. Get me wrong, Swedes did not. They were trusted by their government to take a reaction to this, and that's what would have happened in this country as well. I think the idea is we need the police to keep us inside because we can't be trusted to make sensible decisions for our communities. The premise of lockdown, and it was a libel in the British character, and one which they get not a single kid missed school under the age of 16 in Sweden. As a result, we are not talking. The conversations there do not involve the massive social damage.
It was also interesting, by the way, to remember how much Sweden was attacked as being wrong, and now they've gone rather quiet about it. I can take two more questions. And the gentleman at the back. Sorry if you haven't asked a question, but it's getting quite difficult.
So I'm a teacher.
Can you just say where you're from and speak up?
Okay, I'm also from London, and I'm a teacher. And I just wanted to ask why there are so many ghost children, because for registration legislation meant that the schools had to pass the information to the authorities, and then the local authorities had to hold it. So if that's already in place, how to go on?
They do that. It is in place. Sorry, our research into me shows that they do that.
When you do register, which you said, your information does get passed to the local authority, and the data must be passed from the schools. So who is failing to process the data?
Okay, it's about the ghost children and who's not passing the data on.
Can I ask a second question as well? Sorry.
Well, okay.
Secondly, a lot of home educated children have no access to exams at town, so these ghost children couldn't access exams, and they are extremely expensive. So wouldn't it be a good solution to pay for free examinations, parents front up with their children, give them an exam, and then you will know how. Yeah, potentially. Some people may like that too.
Well, let me answer those two questions together.
What I would say, my experience with authority, all they had was my name and my child's name and my address. Follow that, that.
But they must. They have a law that says they must.
But that's the point, that they've disappeared into the system because they're our failures fulfilling their duties. I think that's the conclusion. Yeah.
On your first bit, that there isn't a law, that it varies on how local authority is. Very patchy. Is that right, Robert? Sorry.
So, that's absolutely fine. But what we said in our committee report was there should be some local authority to local authority. There was guidance from the Department of Education, but each local authority does it differently. I know kids who've been home educated, the local authority never speaks to the family. Never. Are you home educating your children? Yes, of course I am. When really, who knows what on earth is register. On Sam's point, we argued that parents who educate their kids should be faculty so that kids can do exams. But I believe in that's right. So I also believe that the year in basic maths and English for home educated children. Because when you're at school, just let me finish, if you don't mind. When you go to school, you are required to do tests. One test after another. Tests, exams. Why should, just because you're educated tests? And all I'm saying, all we said in our report, they just do basic maths, at least English, at least once a year. I think the Children's Commission is now gone, suggesting it.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. That's okay, great. I just want to pause on this phrase, ghost children. Actually, I think that ties together a lot of discussing here. That there are kids and their kids' experiences factored in to how public policy is being designed, particularly the layering of the kind of five strands of CSJ. There's a layering factor going on here that for some people have poor mental health or they've lacked access to education. Is that they also live in housing not good enough. Is that they also don't have access to good food. They also don't have the right. So, Anne, to your question around what should government be doing, what is the engine of government? I would say a clear enough way of getting to an understanding of these things and how to speak about the importance of a family ministry. I think that's one way into it. But until we have that sort of rounded approach to these things.
Very good. And I did promise the gentleman at the last question at the back, hand up right now.
Thank you all. Amazing job. Why? How it all passes. Look, this is is three things, three bullet points in panel and three this government, our government, should do in order to solve the problem that you so wonderfully described.
I'll give you the attendance officers using catch-up funds, work with the parents back to school and a national register of children so we know those children who have vanished off with. So I'm very sorry I have to go.
Don't worry. Who else wants to come in?
Over the last year at Digital Media. So I think it's still, as I really welcomed your state opening strike to good data for good policy. At Defend Digital Media, we're very concerned that the discussion is inaccurate. Because even the CSJ's own report said that there were over 60,200 children out of school or persistently absent. The 100,000 number. And if you do that, you risk making bad policy decisions on the outcomes. So important, you've changed the definition of persistent absence 3 times since 20 much faster for children to be recorded as persistently absent. And the other important thing to factor do leave school for any mainstream reason. There's over 16 different reasons noted for education, and they are tracked. Our own research of local authorities has counted this to work with you to get the data more accurate.
What I don't know is where you come from.
Defend Digital Media, rights and data so close to our heart. Because the local authorities at the moment, we've found counts to these things. Some count one child once a year. If they move status, they count them multiple times. Some count on a full-time equivalent basis. So how many children, if there's one child, how many children have transferred from mainstream into alternative provision, for example? So we have to get this getting a good policy. I think the big numbers tend to be awfully scary.
Okay. much indeed. I'm going to bring this to a close. And I'm going to say to everybody here, before you go, accept that what we discussed this evening here is arguably the most important thing that we do for the next 3 days, but it won't be discussed anywhere else. So, the panelists who are giving you their views, can you go out and proselytize on the fact that all the other stuff that's going on is less important than this problem out, otherwise we are going to see a bow wave of trouble going through or into or out of employment, into social problems, gangs, crime. You're going to see that wave of the lockdown kids as they grow up, creating dysfunction. Unless we deal with it now. Go out and tell them that, and thank you for coming.